So my name is Len Riskin, and I teach at the University of Florida College of Law, where I have been for a year and a half since the beginning of 2007. Before that, I taught for 22 years at the University of Missouri Law School, where I was the director of the Center for the Study of Dispute Resolution. Before that, I taught for 10 years at the University of Houston Law Center. And going back even further, I was a lawyer with the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. I was the general counsel in Washington, D.C. of an organization called the National Alliance of Businessmen, which was a group started by Henry Ford and President Johnson to find jobs in the private sector for the so-called hardcore unemployed. This was in the late 60s and early 70s. I went to law school at NYU and later went to Yale Law School for an LLM. I got interested in mediation in around 1979 or 1980 when I was teaching at the University of Houston Law School, and noticed that many members of the legal profession, students and lawyers, were suffering a great deal. And part of the suffering, I thought, was the result of the strength of the adversarial perspective within legal education and within the practice. And when I learned about mediation, I thought that mediation is a way to soften that perspective and to add another more inclusive perspective that I thought would help reduce the suffering of lawyers and clients to some extent, and law students. And so for many years I mediated and wrote and taught about mediation and how it could serve these purposes. And then in the late 1990s, I got interested in how a certain form of meditation could help lawyers more or less in the same way to provide better service to their clients and to get more satisfaction out of their work and to deal better with stress. So this method of meditation is known as mindfulness. It's also called insight meditation. It's also called vipassana meditation. And it's a very simple but not easy way of paying attention. It means to pay attention deliberately, in the moment, and without judgment to whatever passes through any of the senses, through the traditional eye, ear, nose, and so forth, and sense of touch, as well as the mind. So the idea is to learn to pay attention in this way, and in order to be present with whatever's going on so that the mind isn't distracted. And so if you're listening to a client, you can really listen to a client and don't get pulled away by your own emotions or by other kinds of personal needs or just your inability to concentrate. And so this is an ancient method that is nowadays used in a number of law firms. It's used in athletics. The LA Lakers meditate before all their games, for example, and it's used in healthcare. And so I've been teaching mindfulness meditation now to law students. This is since about 1999, to law students, lawyers, and mediators, as well as other people, but those are the main groups I work with. And I teach meditation as a way of developing this mindful kind of awareness. That's the basic idea, that you cultivate this ability to be mindful in silent meditation and then bring it into everyday life so that you can feel more present and know more about what's going on and do a better job for those two reasons. It usually brings on a sense of calm. And for many people, it has helped them achieve the kinds of results I've hoped for. And lately I've also I've written a bunch of articles about this subject, and am working on a book about how mindful awareness can help anyone who deals with conflict professionally. And the truth is, of course, it can help anyone who deals with conflict even non-professionally, and that means everyone, of course. But my special audience is people who deal with conflict in a professional capacity, lawyers, managers, executives of various kinds. I can give a couple examples of how mindfulness has helped people I know. One example is a former student of mine who was a trial lawyer, a young woman, who told me that one day when she was in open court, the male lawyer on the other side of the case began to attack her competence as a lawyer in front of the judge and the jury. And she said that ordinarily she would have responded in kind and said something nasty about him. But because she had mindfulness on her mind, she dropped her attention into the breath, and she dropped her attention further into the whole body. And she said she noticed that she felt very hot, that her heart was racing, and that she had a very powerful impulse to strike back at this guy. But because she noticed that, it lost a lot of its force, and she was much more able to do something that she said was skillful and helpful to her client. In other words, she said that ordinarily she would have responded in kind to him as a way of discharging her own anxiety and anger, but which would not have been helpful to the client. So instead of behaving in a reactive way, she behaved in such a way that was calm and thoughtful and helpful to her client. I can give you another example of another former student of mine who was a lawyer, who had developed particular antipathy toward certain judges before whom she argued regularly on an appellate court. I don't want to give any more details. And so what she told me is that for years she had actually gotten into verbal battles with these judges, and that she really disliked them because of certain beliefs they held. Then she started meditating, and she said she began to meditate before her arguments in front of these judges, and that the meditation completely transformed her relationship with them and her feelings toward them. And as a result, she thought she was able to be much more effective and calm and simply explain what she thought the problem was that they were dealing with in court. She attributed this to the meditation and said she was much happier with her work, and she thought maybe she had been more effective too. I'll give you another example of a lawyer who has been meditating for a really long time, and he does a lot of appellate and trial work, but he told me that he'll always meditate before a trial. And one of the changes that he's experienced is that when a judge asks him a question and he's in a mindful state, it's as if the question is coming to him in slow motion and he has all the time in the world. In other words, the experience of the rapid passage of time changes, and he describes it as an experience of timelessness in which he feels he's got plenty of time to figure out what to say.